Well, welcome everyone to this session of the Study Abroad Virtual Showcase. Really great program you're going to hear about this afternoon from Dr. Latta here, talking about the UA New Zealand, one really awesome South Pacific Adventure program through the UA Honors College. So he's going to talk to you about the program, and then there'll be time hopefully for some questions as well. My name, by the way, is Chad Berry. I work here in the Education Abroad office. My title is Associate Director of International Risk, Health and Safety. And but today I'm just kind of here to observe and facilitate and be any help to Dr. Latta I can be. But I'll turn it over to him for now.
All right. Thank you, Chad. Okay, we've got a few people here, and we do have, if you're all seeing the same screen, I am Emily. Emily went with us on our last trip to New Zealand. We share that trip with the English department, so the person in the still picture there is Nate Parker, the English professor that comes with us. So welcome to Catherine and Helen and Jesse and Sarah and Caleb. I'm not sure how to do this, so I'm just going to, well, that's New Zealand. We go there in the background. I'm not quite used to these things. I keep disappearing into the picture. I'm going to share the screen and go through a PowerPoint. I don't particularly like PowerPoints, but it's a good way to get, I think, some basic information down about what we do, where we go, why we go, and so on. And once we've got that done, we can drop back and look at questions. This is what we're calling it, Honours in New Zealand. Aotearoa is the Maori name for New Zealand and is now used on nearly all official New Zealand documents. I called it One Awesome South Pacific Adventure because, as far as I could tell, every other description of every other study abroad program was boring. This is what my backdrop is. This is Russell in the Bay of Islands. We'll go there. This is actually the site of the oldest town in New Zealand. It looked a lot different in the early 1800s, but we go there early on. Let me tell you something about me. I'm an assistant professor in the Honors College. My email is there. I'm from New Zealand, so this is kind of a homecoming for me every year, except this year. We also take with us my fellow Honors College professor, Dr. Anne Franklin Lamar. She's not from New Zealand, she's from Mississippi. And you'll find us in the Honors College. If you ever need to drop by or to find us, we're easy enough to find. My email, her email is there. Let me look at some of the basics. We try to go to some of the most exciting and interesting places you could want to go to in New Zealand. We want to make sure that it's not sort of lost in academia, and I'll talk about that in a minute. We also visit universities, and we basically go through sort of jam sessions. And I'll come back later, and if Emily's still here, she can talk about some of these. The idea is basically us talking to them and them talking to us, and I'll come back to that later. They're not set pieces, lectures, etc. This year, and we've done this in the past, but this year we'll be doing a lot more with the idea of kaitiakitanga, which is the Maori concept of ownership, stewardship mainly of the land. New Zealand, one of the greenest places on the planet, and where it's not, it's trying to be. And a lot of the old Maori concepts are actually now in legislation, in education, and the way New Zealand approaches its environment. So there's a cultural aspect there to how this actually becomes part of the way New Zealanders live. So we're looking at that as a kind of core, but we're not stopping there. Again, Emily can tell you about this. New Zealand has built on dairy farms. It definitely has the best ice cream in the world. It was a significant cost center for us last time. We spent a lot of time and money on ice cream. So that's why that's there. The method I've devised here, my field is communication theory. So I have a series of talking points, and I ask students to talk to locals when they can and where they can. Don't push it, don't intrude. If you're a shyer person, don't do it as much as a more outgoing person, but talk to local people. And we have these conversation points. And then in the evenings, we sit down and talk about them. So we learn from the people we talk to, but we learn something, I would argue, just as much from each other when we talk about who did you talk to, what did they say, what did you ask? So we're using communication infrastructure to try and get a better idea of the people and their neighborhoods and their communities. this is the way we bring a shared information, a focused information into our debriefing points. So academically, we're kind of working throughout every day just by talking to people. The goal here is not just to learn about neighborhoods and communities and how people live together, different races, different religions, different ages, different ethnicities. The goal is to learn to ask better questions. We begin, frankly, as tourists. But as we go on talking to each other in the evenings, debriefing each other and understanding the nuances and sophistications you can get into questions, we tend to ask better questions. We also tend to hear more in the answers, leading to better follow-up questions. We cut through that sort of presentation thing that people give you when you chat to them and they don't know who you are. So one of our goals is to learn how to effectively approach understanding a culture that isn't ours. So it's not something that's just useful in New Zealand. It would be useful in parts of the United States where you feel you're a little bit in the middle of nowhere and you don't fully feel at ease with the people. It would be good in foreign countries. We send a lot of students from the Honors College down to the Alabama Black Belt. Light and day between the university and some of the people we're dealing with, different culture. This is the sort of thing to help us learn to connect, to ask questions, and to actually find some depth in our understandings of the people we're meeting. The actual academic assignments are what I've just said. You go talk to local people. Participate in the debriefings. We write and publish through UA blogs. They're focused, and this is Dr. Lamar's field, but they're focused on what we're learning, what we're doing, the questions we're running into, some of the problems we're having, some of the things we don't understand, some of the things that surprise us, etc. Then we ask you to deliver a final presentation on our last day, which asks you to look in some depth and with some candor and vulnerability at what you thought you'd find, what you have found, what puzzled you, what angers you, and how you've approached that. I put the last thing, live by UA standards, because in fact it is in the syllabus and it is part of the syllabus. The timeline, we start in the day after commencement, which I think next year is May the 2nd. We go to Auckland, big city, 1.5 million people, and we go to one of the most interesting islands in the world in terms of its greenness, Waiheke. We go to the Bay of Islands in Waitangi, which is that picture I started out with. We go to a high school, which is sort of crazy. The kids really enjoy us being there, and it gets weird. We go out into some wetlands and to coastlines and plant some trees. And every year I take a picture of the trees that people took the year before. We go to Rotorua, which is a Maori cultural center and also a sort of Yosemite, bubbling mud, steam, thermal pools and so on. Christchurch, which is kind of laid back and cool. People love that. Queenstown, I do suggest you Google that. It's New Zealand's sort of adventure capital. There's all sorts of things that can be done there. And we finish up in Wellington, which I think everyone really loved. It's arguably the city that most young people in New Zealand would love, and it's been voted internationally one of the world's great cities for young people. That's where we finish up. That doesn't work. Try it again. Oh, yes. Emily, yes, I forgot. About 3 days out, we go past farm and we stop there. It's a small sheep farm. I grew up on farms, dairy farms, but it's a small farm. They do some shearing, working with sheep and so on. And why I like it, New Zealand actually has a monster farm show. And it's Disneyland. It's really not real at all. This, you could feel like you're actually on a farm. So that's really kind of a high point too. It's very relaxing. You feel like you're on someone's farm. It's very enjoyable. I really like that. For accommodations, we stay almost exclusively at youth hostels. I've always found them to be well maintained, comfortable. They've got good amenities. They're safety focused. and there's people from all over the world. Nearly all of them your age. A few older people will stay there. The URL there for yha.co. What we would call NZ and what New Zealanders and Canadians call NZ. Have a look at some of those. It allows you to wander around and have a look at where we would stay. They're very close to the things we need: grocery stores, convenience stores, drug stores, which are very similar to ours, and I think that helps a little bit. We go down to Queenstown, and I don't have a really good enough picture of Queenstown, so I'm using this. It's around the corner there a little bit. It's up in this Lake District, and it really is an adventure-heavy place. Whatever you would think you could do in alpine lake districts, rivers. There's a lake, obviously, but one of the things you can do is jet boating. New Zealand actually invented the jet boat. I should have put a jet boat picture in here. The rivers in this part of New Zealand are very wide and shallow and rocky at the bottom, stones. And a farmer developed a way to get a boat around his property by installing basically a jet engine, sucks water into the bottom, pushes it out at the back. And those things create some incredible rides. Very fast, very shallow, reach out, touch solid rock walls at 70 miles an hour. Okay, we don't really have a typical day, I don't think, but basically we do this. We get up, we're making our own breakfast, we're hanging out together, getting ready, full kitchens, full everything to do that. During the days, a lot of days we'll go to universities, which are unis. A college in New Zealand is a high school. So we'll go and hang out, as I've described before. We'll usually find good places for lunch and sometimes dinner. Go to an event, whether it's a museum, whether it's a show, an art gallery, whatever happens to be in that day's agenda. We move. We used to move daily till some of the girls got on me and pointed out, we don't really want to pack every morning. Come on. So we now usually stay at least 1 or 2 days in every place. We travel by coach. It's our own coach. You can lie on the floor if you like. We're not worried about other people joining us. Can we stop here? Can we go here? Fine. We'll get together in the evenings to talk about the day's conversations. We have time, I should say time, to get adventurous. There's a lot of time built in, I think. Or you could say we have to get adventurous. Yeah, we do. There's a lot of spare time, partly because of the way I built it. When you do want to do something on your own or go somewhere, whether it's hiking, boating, going to a botanical garden or whatever, theater, you can also talk to people. That's the way I built it. So you don't have time working on academics and then time somewhere else. If you're in the theater, intermission time, you can talk to people. So we've got plenty of time in there for you to kind of do your own thing. And then there's a lot to do in the evening. Sometimes we're in rural areas, sometimes we're in the cities. When we do go to the universities, we basically hang out. We try to stay on our talking points, but I don't mind where it goes. As long as we're listening to what the students we're talking to are asking us, they've been given our talking points. We want to create a genuine exchange of ideas, thinking, doubts, etc., emotions, opinions, whatever. I'm puzzled about this in New Zealand. They'll tell you they're puzzled about this in America. Why is this different? Why is that different? You will inevitably get the obvious questions: politics, guns, the ones that you imagine will take the headlines. But when we sit down and do this, we're in very informal. You can get into a group and wander around the university for a couple of hours or sit in the dining room halls or whatever. And then we kind of get back together and just discuss, what did we talk about? What came up? What were your differences? What were your similarities? So there's not a lot of set pieces when we get to academia. Last time we went to Milford Sound, generally considered by New Zealanders and many other people to be the 8th wonder of the world. It's very remote. When you get there, you realize you are in one of the most isolated and amazingly, emotionally beautiful places on the planet. For packing, there's some real basic stuff here. Don't take anything too big or bulky. You don't have that much. You just want one suitcase. You will find in New Zealand supermarkets and drugstores pretty much what you find here. You won't find exactly the same recipe. So for prescriptions, or if there's something you use or take or buy here at a CVS or Walgreens or whatever, it might be better to take that with you. You won't get exactly the same prescription if you need it. Laundries, every place has laundries, and every place has lines for laundries. So we say pack for about 4 days in case you don't get to the front of the line. What we had last year, I think, were people working cooperatives, you know, someone doing laundry for 4 or 5 people. I don't think we need anything particular. I always say, you know, if you want to go out and look good, then bring something to look good. We go to Parliament, we go to good restaurants. So you want to be dressed for that. But no, we don't need suits and ties or you know, high-end designer dresses if you don't think you need them. It's fall, daytime low 60s, nighttime usually in the high 50s. It will go lower sometimes. And it's kind of the wet season. We haven't had a real lot of trouble with rain, but light rain gear is a good idea. And then I repeat the laundry idea. Okay. There's always that idea that every study abroad class has, in case your luggage gets lost, bring a change of clothing, which hasn't happened yet. The exchange rate helps you. The New Zealand dollar costs about 67 cents. So you give the man $100, he gives you 130. Passports, yes, you need them, but you don't need a visa. You will also need them every time you go to a restaurant, oddly enough. Wherever alcohol is served, the owners must verify the age of everyone that walks into the restaurant unless you're like under about 8 years of age. An odd thing, not a bad thing. Drunk driving is down dramatically because of measures like that. No visa needed. Health, we have in New Zealand a really strong healthcare system. We're always close to doctors, hospitals, and emergency health of really high quality. Wi-Fi, good, mostly. If you really want to stay in touch, if the girlfriend, the boyfriend, mom, dad, uncle, somebody wants to stay in touch with you, maybe get something from here. We've had people walk into the airport, buy a SIM card, buy a local package, have it installed on the phone and use that. I do that. New Zealand has arguably done the best job, or one of the best jobs in the world at containing COVID, but it's COVID. So check constantly. The COVID-19 update from UA, from study abroad, those things are essential. I think the State Department link is always on the study abroad site. There is a New Zealand site there you can go to, but the State Department and UA will keep you up to date. And I haven't, well, let me go to this one. Cost, we haven't worked out the cost yet. Let me just say this. I know study abroad and the people we're dealing with, and I will take my lead entirely from study abroad here, are working out a way for us to sign up for this. They'll work out the costs, but they're working to make sure that we don't get left in the lurch if it doesn't happen. In terms of, you know, you don't lose your money. I don't know exactly how they're going to do that, but do be aware that study abroad will make sure that everything that can be done will be done to make sure that you don't lose money. That by the time you pay money, will definitely be going. And it will be safe. When you do get there, your cost includes all the internal travel, accommodation, events, excursions, museum, and a lot of meals. Not necessarily all of them, all breakfasts. When you go to New Zealand, if you're looking for a meal, you can find low-end anywhere on the planet, McDonald's, KFC, Subway, etc., and local place. So you can get by on a pretty low budget. You pay to fly to and from New Zealand. I suggest checking out the Air New Zealand site for costs. Off the top of my head, last year, your round trip from here to New Zealand and back from Birmingham was about $1,250, $1,300. These are study abroad ways for you to use the QR code at the bottom. And that's about what I have on the PowerPoint chat, if you want to add anything there. Otherwise, we can look at some questions. I can't see anybody, I can see names, but anybody has a question, fire away. Oh, this is the farm we go to. Okay, Sheep World. And this hat was quite a hit, actually. Emily will tell you that. It was actually, and I still have it, it was rather good. Any questions at all? Fire away. No? Um, New Zealand, I think you will find, is a safe place, which is always a good thing to know. I tell students, and Emily will confirm, I think, that, okay, there are some obvious places. Don't go down that alley at 11 o'clock at night. We stay in safe places. We function in groups wherever possible of 2, 3, 4 people. So I think the variety you run into, New Zealand is an absolutely beautiful place, but it's packed into a relatively small space. So you can go from Christchurch to Queenstown is about an hour's flight, and you go from, we had a surfer with us 2 years ago, surfing in the morning, not quite skiing, there's not quite enough snow. You can pack a lot into the spaces we go to, into the time. If we're on a bus for 2 hours, everything changes. When I used to live in Florida, in 2 hours, nothing changes. And if you live in West Texas, nothing changes for what, 3 days? So there's a lot of change when you're driving around, which I think helps make every day different, you know? So
could you put the QR code back up?
Probably. You're dealing with someone who is, what shall I call it? I think technically challenged is probably the nice way to put it. Can you
There you go.
read that, Helen? There you go.
And Dr. Latta, we have some questions in the chat. I don't know if you can see that.
I will as soon as I go to stop share. Yes, okay. What do we got here? Yeah, okay. Caleb, do you have to be in the UA's honors program? Yes. Are you, Caleb? Oh, you might be muted.
Okay.
You do have to, but we do travel with the English department, which is Emily. So if you're not in the honors department and the honors college, you can't do this program as an honors student, but you might be able to travel with the English department, which is what Emily did. We do everything the same, except their academic work is slightly different.
Okay, thank you.
There's another question in the chat about COVID. If COVID is still an issue by next May, is there a chance this trip would be delayed to the end of the summer, or would it just be canceled until May 2022? And I'll chime in kind of with my piece of that from the Education Abroad Office. And Dr. Latta, I don't know if you want to talk about the option we were discussing before we began the meeting as well. But yeah, we will make, in terms of we in Education Abroad, we will make a call about sort of viability of programs and the effect COVID may have on programs fairly early on in the spring semester. As far as the option of whether it be delayed later in the summer or canceled, I would say it's probably a TBD thing, but and maybe you would be able to speak better about the timing.
Well, you know, I don't know whether we could change the timing.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
You know, hotels,
yeah,
aircraft, etc. We have talked of virtual.
Yes,
we do virtual as an option. I want to make sure that it's not just, here's a GoPro in front of the bus. Mm-hmm. On the left-hand side is this, and on the right-hand side is this. I'm talking to the people we've dealt with in New Zealand, and we're looking at actually something on this kaitiakitanga concept that I think actually is pretty interesting stuff. I think it could be very effective in dipping into Maori culture with one-on-one meetings and some. It could be really, really good. So I don't know. Honestly, Jesse, I don't think we could slide it back because of all the commitments we've made, airlines, etc. Would we cancel it? I think that would probably be a study abroad call, with the obvious exception if there's massive COVID outbreaks, we know what the call is and it's an obvious one. So I think what we'll do is we'll try and build in a virtual backup. But as I said earlier, again, I think by the time study abroad makes that call, you can be committed but will not lose, I guess, Chad, this is the study abroad idea, you won't lose deposits or anything else. That if that call is made to cancel, you will not be committed. What you lose is, if we don't do a virtual, is 3 hours credit come May.
Yeah, yeah. And like I said, we're working out to notify everybody, well before the money is due and all that. But
well, I don't see any more questions, so I want to ask Emily to give you her absolutely candid, and a big ice cream consumer, so an absolutely candid response to what she thinks
about the trip.
About the whole trip.
Oh gosh. So this trip is, honestly, you guys will never be the same. It's going to change your life, and I know everybody who studies abroad says this, and it's probably true for other places, but New Zealand is absolutely the greatest place you could ever dream of going. It changed my whole career path too, and what I want to do with my life. So it's going to affect you both in like academic ways, but also just in your everyday life. And if you do the honors class or the English class, like, you're going to go and talk to these New Zealanders, and some of them, if you actually put effort into this, you can become friends with them and establish those relationships that you'll keep even when you come back to the States. Like, there was one student who we went to a law school, and I'm also in law school this year. So we had the same general interests academically, but he and I have been corresponding ever since the trip, and we send each other care packages during coronavirus when we were all in lockdown. I'm like, you can make these relationships and make the world feel a little bit smaller just by knowing someone on the other side of the world. So put all the effort you can into it, even if you're not an outgoing person. I'm really, really not. I'm pretty shy, but you will just get so much out of it if you put some effort in. And it's so worth it. You get to see sheep, you get to maybe see penguins if you're lucky. It's such an incredible trip and an experience you will never get anywhere else. And also, when you go to Queenstown, do the bungee jump. It's worth it.
That's where bungee jumping, and I'm not recommending this because I have to count you in the mornings, but this is in Queenstown. There's an old bridge over a river. That was where it began. New Zealand has invented bungee jumping and zorbing. What's zorbing? You get inside a very large plastic ball and roll down a hill. I know it sounds crazy, but that's what zorbing is. And Emily, of course, understated that a little. Emily also floated. We went to Hobbiton.
On day one.
Hobbiton. We went to Hobbiton, and she's been a Hobbit fan since she was a little girl. And we walked all around Hobbiton, and I don't think her feet touched the ground. So it's a wonderful place to visit. It actually, the way it's been put together, Emily, in there, I mean, you feel like you're there. There's no skyscrapers around. There's no cities around. There's no roads around. It's an unusual, and you look up at the sky and you realize, I'm looking at the Southern Cross and I'm 10,000 miles from home, and this feels great. And incidentally, the Air New Zealand has all the Tolkien movies in the back of their seat. Speaking of that, if you do check Air New Zealand for rates, go to Google and to YouTube and look at some of their safety videos. And they were sort of the world pioneer in making sort of amusing videos, which were basically, to begin with, Lord of the Rings videos. So yeah, I think we try and make sure, my goal is to do exactly what Emily said, to make sure you're sort of different when you come back. We try to make sure that through the connections, because when you do go to some of these places, you still can connect to people. At law school was a very cool place to go to, but you feel like you connect. And I think we get to know people better than tourists do. And the goal is to actually find you connect with people on a reasonably raw emotional sort of level, so that they really want to know who you are and you really want to know who they are. And that's a goal. The costs, yes, to Helen, there are 3 UHP credits, University Honours Program credits. Costs, they're not set. I'm going to take a chance and see if I got this right. And I think maybe Chad will remember. You're out of pocket to get to New Zealand and back, which you pay for. Last year, I think for me, from Birmingham was like $1,300. It's less if you're leaving from LA or Chicago. You can fly out of LA, San Francisco, or Chicago. I prefer Air New Zealand. United goes, but there are not many airlines going. I think the cost was $4,900 or $5,100. Out-of-pocket costs when you get to New Zealand can be very low. The exchange rate is terrific. If it costs $10, it's basically $7 American. That's about my limit with math. But you can find any meal at the same way you'd find it here. Let's go for a hamburger, let's go for a sandwich or something. So you can keep your incidental costs significantly down compared, say, to Europe. I don't know whether that's enough, Helen. That's my guess. We should have numbers, Chad, before November, December? November?
Yeah, somewhere around there. And I was going to say, I think the estimated cost for last year's program was only around $5,000. That's payable. That was the payable part to UA. So that would include your course tuition as well as pay for a lot of the accommodations and other program costs. But then, of course, you mentioned the out-of-pocket, the plane tickets, and some of your own other incidental costs you'd pay when you're on the ground there. In addition to that, but in terms of the chunk of your program cost would be about $5,000. That was the estimated cost for last year.
Right. And Kiwis don't tip, so that saves you money. Right. Tipping's not allowed. What else? Do we have any other? Yeah, I think our out-of-pocket cost, remind me, Emily, I don't think there was that much outside of food, really. Movies are relatively cheap. Dinner, I think if you go out to a fairly good restaurant, it's going to cost you significantly less than it costs in the United States to a reasonably good. Now, you can get super high-end restaurants that will cost a lot, but you don't have to. And New Zealand is very much into outdoors, so you can get a lot of those sorts of restaurants that feel like they're open to the outdoors. They're still good restaurants, but they're not necessarily super high-end. So I don't think your out-of-pocket is going to be all that much. And you can work a lot of it out online with Google and some of the costs looking at New Zealand, say, restaurant websites and some of the cost of adventure stuff in Queenstown was more expensive, jet boats or parasailing or bungee jumping or that sort of thing. But that's optional. Hiking was the low cost end.
Yeah, the out-of-pocket cost is honestly, you can regulate that yourself with, choosing what to do. New Zealand is very much an outdoor enthusiasts playground. So if you are really into hiking, everything you can do would be free. Like there's somewhere to hike in every city, every town that we go to. And restaurants, like Dr. Latta said, you can choose. The lower end restaurants are still really good. And you can balance out your money by choosing what you do, and you won't have any less of an experience by spending less money.
Right. And we've had mountain bikes are easy enough to rent. Any adventure gear is pretty easy to rent, especially in Queenstown. We had two guys travel with us 2 years ago who were members of the UA fishing team. And they took rods and they fished all around New Zealand. That was really cool. You can do a lot by looking ahead. Here's another thing that I have suggested. I have suggested talking to people. We had someone who was going to go with us this year who was a nurse in the nursing school, and someone was in early education. I've said to them, okay, in the time we are going, say, to a museum or to an art gallery, if you want to, go to a school, go to a hospital, go to a nursing school, go somewhere where you'll find your major being pursued. That's a call from New Zealand, strangely enough. So that you go talk to school kids, see if you can get permission to go to a school, and they'll show you around the school and tell you how they teach it. You're an education major, you can come back with that. And when we get into the evenings, you're still talking about generally our focus things. So our nurse she wants to be a traveling nurse. She was going to go to hospitals and nursing schools and emergency clinics, which with their approval, call ahead, text ahead, and set those up. And if you're talking to real people, that's fine for me academically. So that's an option. Emily, thank you for coming.
Of course, anytime I get a chance to talk about New Zealand, I'm never going to pass it up.
Thanks.